Hello, everyone. Jeff.
Hello.
How is everyone out there in the interwebs land?
Hope you're all well.
Sin and
Got a lot of friends here already. It's great.
I hope week every
Hey. Yeah, it has been a while. So you ready to publish it? All right. Sorry. We're both a little bit like, hey, it's Wednesday, so you'll have to forgive us. Ugh. But we have a big topic. Actually, one we've been meaning to talk about for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we don't
Uh,
usually respond to like Twitter argument topics, but this was the thing that kind of made the round now and then.
it,
People argue
yeah, pretty
about
much.
this type of thing.
Pretty much anytime like somebody starts a Clone Wars rewatch, this topic comes up. I think.
It's something I think you and I both have feelings
I have a lot of feelings about this
about.
topic.
we thought
I
we
know,
could
but you're welcome.
Stop Wars.
Stop Wars. Be a very different movie.
Star Piece.
The sequel after the sequel trilogy, the Benioff and Wise series will be called Star Piece.
A bunch of Jedi just kind of sitting around in a room.
Hanging out.
Inexplicably, it's the longest Star Wars movie. It's
Yeah,
just 3.5 hours.
it's like a bunch of 2001: A Space Odyssey sequences, but what's up with my voice? I don't know. There's something up with my voice.
But I can tell.
I'm listening to the stream back now. Maybe I'm louder than you.
I mean, maybe the levels look about the same to me.
All right.
Audio problems. All
I mean, I always sound like I'm a 12-year-old pubescent boy, so that could be what's up with my voice. But
I have a
that's a whole
story
other
about
thing.
that I'll tell you. Um, not a thing that I want.
Streamed live to the internet
But what we do want to stream live to the
is the actual topic.
is our conversation about whether or not the Jedi were wrong to go to war, specifically in the Clone Wars, but I think we'll probably jump around to some other Jedi adjacent wars.
Adjacent solo. What?
That was a nice try. A for effort.
This next try.
But yeah, so that's what we want to do today is were the Jedi wrong to go to war? So if you have thoughts about this, make sure you can share it and chat with us. Respond to your thoughts as we go through things. Um, go into solo mode here for a second. Um, um, wouldn't be a Port Haven StreamCast if for some technical issues. So, uh, bear with us as we handle this for a second. But we appreciate you guys coming out with us. We had a lot of fun last week talking um, Alphabet Squadron with everyone. Oh, you missed my songs. Oh, I appreciate that. I always have ideas for songs, but all of the music I listen to is not like popular music anymore. Oh, now we've gone and done a thing. Hold on just a second. Hi, we are here again. Um,
That was fun.
I was just telling everything Star Wars. They asked about my songs.
Oh.
I tell them I get ideas all the time, but nobody knows the music.
To be fair, you usually ask me, and I don't know any music.
One of these days, I'll do a Ren collective.
There you go. Then I'll definitely know it.
It'll be this. Um,
They're big in Northern Ireland.
but but yeah. So Sin already has a thought. Funny that I went to war. Given, I mean, and that's kind of how the discussion gets phrased when it goes around Twitter a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The basic argument I see on the social media, which is one of the reasons I avoid social media as
Mm-hmm.
much as possible. But the idea that the Jedi were somehow wrong or like morally evil for getting involved in the Clone Wars,
Yep.
and I just I mean, I don't. I would say that I don't know about you, but I do know exactly what you think about this.
You've heard my thoughts many times.
Um,
I think the last week I've sent you a video once a day at least about my thoughts on this topic.
but I think both of us kind of tend to take a different approach to this. Maybe this
Yeah.
is. I thought about when we were starting the thread saying were the Jedi wrong to go to war, and then just saying no and ending the stream. Yep, that's
Nope.
just like
No,
that's
I will not be taking comments at this time.
how my video about the Sith troopers. Just say they're red, and
I've
that's
had a thought of having like a running series on here that has like a 15-second intro, and then it's just like me asking like a frequently asked question, like, "Will Snoke come back?" No, and then that's like the end of the video, no discussion.
um, we did get some responses to me tweeting out the picture of young Snoke with the
Yes,
face hat last.
that's good stuff. All right, but still, topic. Okay.
Yeah. So why don't I'll go first and kind of explain why I think that the Jedi were specifically joined the. And that's
Yes.
a lot of that deals with the fact that even though I understand that Jedi dogma is at its heart non-violent, and
Mm-hmm.
Yoda and Empire tells us that wars are not a path to greatness. Kind of understand that about the Jedi. I A lot of my thoughts on this issue boil down to I don't know really what other options I would have,
Yes.
because from my point of view, and I know you have thoughts on this, but by the time you get to Attack of the Clones,
He's going first because I would never see the mic if I went
which
first.
yeah, which you just watched this today, so maybe you have fresher thoughts on it. Even though it's the movie I tend to watch the most now that I think about it, probably. Um, Maybe I should have gotten my comic adaptation of reference. But by the time we get to Attack of the Clones, from my perspective, things are always already in motion such that
Mm-hmm.
um there was going to be a civil war. Like
Yes.
like even if we didn't know that Palpatine had planned it all, which he did, like that's
Yeah.
how things were. Like the Separatists were going to leave, the Republic was not going to let them leave.
Right.
Like they were building an army of battle droids. Like they weren't just gonna keep those battle droids on Sereno, just in
Mm-hmm.
case. Like there was a war brewing. The clones had already been ordered a decade earlier. Like
Yep.
so like that was going to happen. The whole context for Attack of the Clones is that they are about to vote to create an army to deal with
Yep.
the separatists. So like all of that is going to happen. And so if you are the Jedi, you are given the choice to involve yourself in this or not.
Yep.
If you involve yourself in it, then well, one, maybe you get the opportunity to try to lessen its impact on the
Mm-hmm.
galaxy, like to create, even though you don't like war and war disagrees with your essential dogma, to involve yourself in it is to try to limit its effects as much as
Yep.
possible, or like to create a martial scenario that is in line with your philosophy. Whereas, and this is completely colored probably by our having read the New Jedi Order, where the Jedi get blamed for literally everything that happens,
Yep.
regardless
Even
of what they
though,
do.
yeah.
That as soon as the Jedi, I think, made a decision not to get involved in the Clone Wars,
Hmm.
then they get blamed for not immediately winning the war. They get blamed for
Yep.
every death that happens. The question is always, why aren't the Jedi patriotic enough to step in? Like, what is
Right.
the purpose of the Jedi being there if not to help the Republic? And I just feel like they're in such a rock and a hard place that they take what looks to be the best option, especially considering that they don't know that a Sith Lord has engineered the whole thing from the beginning.
Right.
um,
I mean, they know the Sith are involved, but they don't know to the extent.
right.
And that's largely the problem. And Yoda says multiple times that the dark side has clouded their abilities. And that's a big thing for me. Is people always talk about like Jedi wisdom and like the Jedi should have known better or like should have been using the Force and sensing the Force. Only we hear so many times that they can't. They admit that they can't. Yoda tells Palpatine that he can't use the Force, like that the dark side clouds everything. Impossible to see the future is. And it's kind of like, imagine, you're like me, you're a millennial that has grown up with your GPS in your pocket, and that's how you get around, and then suddenly cell service goes out and you need to figure out how to use a paper. I know how to use a paper map, so I'd be fine, but like suddenly you have to figure out how to get somewhere without GPS. You can get completely lost. And the Jedi lost their GPS. They no longer have access to the Force to the degree that they've been used to for centuries. So of course they're going to make bad decisions, I guess is the way I would put it.
I mean, and not
Hello,
only do
Stuart.
they not have access to the Force, it has taken them a while to realize just
Mm-hmm.
how much they are limited in their access.
Yes.
Not something that just you woke up on a Tuesday, all of a sudden can't feel the Force anymore. It's been one of those, like when you put an animal in the boiling water,
Yeah.
slow boil kind of thing. Slowly been affecting them. They don't realize it until the Sith have already revealed themselves.
Yep.
Which I know you have a lot of thoughts about,
How many thoughts?
that's the whole point. Like
Yeah.
like we know that Palpatine's whole thing, at least what we know about Palpatine until Rise of Skywalker comes out in December.
Right.
Like Palpatine's whole deal is planning everything out such that he even has contingency plans for the event that he dies.
Yep.
Like that's his deal, is that he is a master planner, and
Yep.
he created a situation such that the Jedi are in a position to be blamed either way.
Yes.
And from my point of view, that's what's going to happen. Jedi are going to be blamed and scapegoated either way. Then I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the answer is to take the route where you can at least affect the course of things.
Yeah.
That may be putting too fine a head on it, but
Well, and the way I kind of look at it too, we had a discussion a couple of months back before Captain Marvel came out about whether or not the Jedi count as superheroes. And I'm going to kind of contradict our point here because I think you and, if I remember correctly, we largely came down on they're close to superheroes, but they function more like a religious group than like a superhero group, if I'm remembering correctly. Um, but the way the people in the galaxy would look at them as is these super powered beings, regardless of
right,
whether or not that is what the Jedi are. So imagine the Avengers in the Battle of New York went, whoa, guys, we're going to get too power hungry if we defend New York from all the Chitauri attacking. So we're going to sit this one out. You guys have a military. You guys have soldiers. You guys are good. You can nuke New York, it's fine. We're just going to go over here so that we don't get too power hungry. And everyone would have been like, no one would have accepted that as an answer whatsoever. And we see that largely in Legends canon, largely because current canon has not dealt with other time periods where there are Jedi very much yet. But in Legends, as you were saying, New Jedi Order, it's the exact opposite. One of the things I kind of talked about, or one of the things I see a lot in online discourse, is that the Jedi Council is the problem. The Jedi Council is too constrictive. is too full of dogma. They're the problem. If the Jedi didn't have a Jedi Council, it would be better. And what we see in the New Jedi Order is that's just not true. There is no Jedi Council at the time of the New Jedi Order, which is 25 years after Return of the Jedi. And the Jedi are scattered to the winds. You have Jason Solo, who is the child of Luke and Leia in this universe, or one of the children of Luke and Leia in this universe, and he wants to go live in a swamp like Yoda at the age of 17. Right,
Yeah.
like he thinks Jedi should not have any kind of active involvement, and then you have other Jedi that are running around as vigilantes. They're in fighter squadrons. They're taking the aggression to the battlefield, and there's no one to regulate them because there's no true Jedi Council. Like they answer to Luke, but there are too many of them for Luke to control without a council. And as a result, it creates a lot of problems for the Jedi and for the Republic. And then you have Knights of the Old Republic, where there is a Jedi Council, and they refuse to go to war. They sensed a plot by the Sith, a trap by the Sith. They didn't go to war. Revan and Malak went anyway. And even though Revan and Malak went anyway, and even though Revan and Malak ultimately fell to the dark side, which arguably maybe they wouldn't have had to if the Jedi had joined the war from the beginning, we don't know. That argument isn't proven true, but is made in the KOTOR mythos.
Right.
Even with all of that, you have soldiers like Carth Onasi who hate Revan and Malak now, who get into a fight with Kandor Zordo, and is like, yeah, but if Revan and Malak hadn't have gone to war, you and I would be having this conversation in Mandalorian. Like, even then, Carth is like, no, the Jedi Council made a mistake by waiting as long as they did. So every other example we have is the Jedi made the wrong choice. Now, did they make the wrong choice, or in all of these scenarios, is there simply no right choice?
Well, and it's complicated too, because as much as you have thoughts about Revan, I have thoughts about Exile, who
Right.
followed Revan to, and was the only person who came back to face consequences for it after the fact, and so like the Jedi Council like took it out on her because like she went and did the thing that she felt was morally right, and then came back to answer the people who said it was wrong.
Right.
And so like that even gets more complicated because Exile was basically the cause of the destruction of a whole planet.
Yep.
More or less. And even though that contributed to the end of the war, and it's so morally gray that I think it demonstrates that there's not an easy answer to this, that it is a complicated thing. But one of the biggest differences between that war and the Clone Wars to me is that the Jedi Council knew that it was a Sith trap.
Yep.
Whereas like with the Clone Wars they didn't. And I feel like you can't say without understanding the extent to which Palpatine had engineered down to the very last detail what was going on. I mean, even if you look at something like Jedi Lost, where we get this example.
That was by Kevin Scott, right?
Oh yeah, it's time for our new feature.
Wait.
That was our obligatory Kevin Scott reference.
Because
was unintentional, but still there it is.
Still there. It makes it even better.
But if you look at
anyway, Jedi Lost.
But if you look at Jedi Lost, like Dooku goes before the Senate to argue that the Jedi need to go help somewhere, and they're told no.
Right.
Like, and again, I can't help but compare that to the Clone Wars. Like, if the Jedi say yes, then they're wrong. If the Jedi say no, then they're wrong. If the Jedi say we'll partially get involved, then they're wrong. And I just don't feel like there is a way for them to be right, because it has specifically been like it's not a question of whether or not war is right or wrong. It's a question of what other options did they have, and the situation was created specifically not to give them other options.
Yes. Um, Largely how I feel about this is yes, I think you can make a very strong argument that it is against the Jedi ideals to go to war. Another thing that people bring up is the ethics of using clones as a military force. You know, people who did not choose to be in the military, who were bred to be in the military, and my thing with that is, yeah, I would say it's unethical to use a clone army. Yeah, I can think you can say it's unethical to try to be an aggressor in a war, although technically, I think it's kind of hard to say who was really the first aggressor, even though I suppose it would technically be the Republic. But I feel like the fate of the Jedi was sealed as early as the Phantom Menace. And this is what you were talking about earlier to a point is I don't think Palpatine would have allowed the Sith to be revealed to have Maul be seen if his plan wasn't locked at that point. So to me, the 10 years between the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones are it's just it's at that point it's going to happen. Exactly how it happens we don't know, but it's locked in stone. To go back to Jedi Lost, um Sifo Dyas has a point where he's seeing a vision about Dooku and he's freaking out and having he's over for, if you haven't listened to the audiobook, which you definitely should, he's overcome by all of these visions he's having. I see the stream on a delay, so I just saw that you flipped the reference back up. um, he's overcome by all these visions that he's having, and at a certain point, Dooku makes a choice, and when Dooku makes that choice, the future is locked, and Sifo Dyas is no
Right.
longer overcome by his visions, and he's like, the future is set. To me, that's what we see. That's what the Phantom Menace is. That the future really gets locked there, and that Attack of the Clones is just the formalities. And not that that should really excuse anything. Like if I know somebody is going to die in the next 5 minutes, and I say, well, they're going to die in 5 minutes anyway, I'm going to kill them. That's still murder. It doesn't make it okay just because fate is sealed. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the Jedi were. I would disagree with you slightly. I think it's possible for the Jedi to have known they were in a Sith trap by the time they get to Attack the Clones. The problem is the trap has already sprung in the Phantom Menace. They think that there could be a trap, not realizing that they're already trapped. By the time we get to the Attack of Clones, they already know that there's a Sith around, that only one is dead. There's another one out there. Whether or not it was the master or apprentice, they don't know. And then to just kind of have this army pop up out of nowhere conveniently for them, ordered by Sifo Dyas, who we now know had ties to darker lore. It seems really convenient, but it's also, you can't look a gift horse in the mouth. And they really need an army like right then and there. And I think that after Attack of the Clones, at the end of Attack of the Clones, when Yoda's like, the Shroud of the Dark Side has fallen, begun the Clone Wars has, I think at that point Yoda is aware that they fell for it. But he also doesn't know what to do about it. So like maybe in Attack of the Clones they couldn't have known, but by the end of Attack of the Clones they have to know that there's Sithly things afoot, especially when Dooku basically tells the whole plan to Obi-Wan. And it's so outlandish that they kind of believe it, or they can't believe it.
Well, and I also think too. Have you read the new canon Maul comic?
I have not. I've only read the lead out of Clone Wars. I have not read the newer one.
Because the whole deal of that comic, and I don't think this is not specific to the story, but Maul wants to start killing Jedi, and Palpatine kept telling him it's not time yet. It's not time yet. You know, the plan is in works. It's not time. I'll let you know when it's time to go do this. And the Maul issue of the Age of Republic follows in that same vein. And like that's whole Palpatine's whole thing is it's not time to reveal ourselves. And like the care and attention that he is giving to like the choice of when and where and how to reveal themselves is so specific that I can't think that it's haphazard. You know, it's intentional when he sends Maul to Tatooine.
Yep.
It's choice when he's sending him to Naboo. Like
Mm-hmm.
like there's intent there. Like it's part of the plan. I don't think that Palpatine, who has waited, decades, jumps the
Mm-hmm.
gun until he feels like the deck is stacked in his favor.
Right.
And we did get a comment. Emphas Nest says in the chat that the Jedi should have pursued diplomacy, perhaps more the Clone
Mm-hmm.
Wars, and I think we would be remiss to think that that doesn't happen. Um,
Yeah.
Especially because we see like Padme keeps talking about let's return to diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's only so much diplomacy you can do if the other side isn't willing to negotiate.
Right.
And there again, with the Sith controlling both sides of the war, like I feel like negotiation. I mean, and maybe they could have done more, but I don't think that doing more would have solved anything. Given again that
Right.
the whole
To have
war was a
diplomacy with who?
charade. I mean,
and
it's
and granted, they couldn't have known that, but it's also to the extent that any diplomacy they would have tried just wouldn't have worked mysteriously. And I think the thing to keep in mind too with the clones, and because this is the thing I see all the time, is that the Jedi were wrong, ethically wrong, morally wrong for taking up a clone army. The Jedi Council, such as it is, did not commission the clone army. The Camino says that they did. Camino, the Lama Su says that Sifo-Dyas, a member of the Jedi Council, ordered the army, and then Obi-Wan later says to Mason, and I know this because I just watched the movie, says that Sifo ordered it on behalf of the Senate. Now, I don't know. We knew in Legends what happened. I don't know if we know in current canon if it really was Sifo or not, or if it was Dooku or somebody pretending to be Sifo.
right.
That might be known now. And I know what happened in Legends, but that's it was Sifo in Legends. But I think I understand this is kind of a cop out, but the clone army was made regardless of what the Jedi did. And the clone army would be used regardless of what the Jedi did. They were not the grand army of the Jedi Council, they were the grand army of the Republic. If the Jedi had not served as generals, somebody else would have served as generals. And those people would probably have treated the clones as a lot more like cannon fodder than the Jedi did. And I'm not saying it makes it okay, but I'm saying what would have not joining the war have done for any of the clones. And that's really what it comes down to, is I get what's more in line with the Jedi Order. Palpatine constructed a scenario where either they go to war and that is against the codes and what a Jedi should be, or they sit back and meditate. I mean, not to get too on topic, but how often do you hear people say that it's contrived to just say our thoughts and prayers are with you when you don't really do anything? That's what it would have been like if the Jedi just sat and meditated. It would have been our thoughts and prayers are with you, but we're not going to do anything. And that's how the Republic would have seen it. And that would have been used against them too, because then Palpatine, not himself, but he would have found puppets to say, well, look, the Jedi don't really want to do anything for you, and it would have lessened how they're perceived in the Republic. And it really was, they were out of it either way.
Well, and I also think Infus Nest says diplomacy concerning more systems not falling to the. I think after Geonosis, that's largely a done deal too. Like because the main groups that are going to join the Separatists have by the time of the Battle of Geonosis. And
it's
everything
where all their armies come from.
And everything after that is conquest. Like I don't feel like it's a secession movement that continues. It continues via, the Separatist armies taking over planets.
Right.
Or at least that's what we're led to believe. I mean, that's what we see in Clone Wars. And I keep going back to if the answer is that the Jedi were wrong, to go to war, then I want to know where is the line? Like what would they have been expected to do by us as people that believe in the Jedi or want to hold them accountable to their own. Like, do they just leave the Republic altogether? Do they say, we can't in good faith be a part of the Republic, and so we're just going to go hang out on Octo, or we're going to relocate to some other planet altogether? Like what does that look like? Or are they still just going to be kind of the peacekeepers on the sideline, handling trade disputes in the middle of a war? Are they going to be just sitting there in their temple on Coruscant while the war's going on around them? Because at the very least it can be cast as unfeeling and compassionate, but maybe it is unfeeling and uncompassionate. Like, that's the whole point of that storyline from KOTOR with Revan, is that we are supposed to believe that people died who would not have otherwise died because the Jedi chose not.
And to the point of diplomacy, if you look at the very first episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, not counting the movie, the first episode that aired on TV, Ambush, is a Yoda episode, which is why I also remember the title. And it's Yoda on Toydaria, or on one of Toydaria's moons, and he's meeting with the king of the Toydarians, and the Separatists show up. And so it's Yoda and like 3-4 clones and an entire Separatist army. And Yoda does fight the clones and stuff, but he does it largely because they're cornered. Like, most of the episode is actually Yoda and the clones running away until the very last possible second where they're surrounded, and then Yoda basically takes out a whole army by himself. But the whole point of that was, this is an important system that hadn't aligned itself with the Separatists or the Republic yet, hadn't fully decided, hadn't fully committed. And Dooku and Yoda are in this battle of wills to try to impress King Kachuko. And Yoda largely wins by doing the Jedi thing. I mean, he basically outsmarts the Separatists, and he allows Dooku to show his true colors, and then King Kachuko makes his decision. So there are situations where we are seeing the Jedi do that and be Jedi, and trying to hold on to their principles. It's that they are put in this incredibly impossible situation. And to the extent that the Jedi should have, could have, would have done more, I absolutely think they could. But my argument is Attack of the Clones is too little too late. That all of the should have, would have, could have during the Clone Wars is irrelevant. That should have been done before the Phantom Menace. That in the time of Jedi Lost, in the time of Master and Apprentice, that was when the Jedi still had a chance and they weren't acting on it.
Well, and that's kind of what Infosnest just posted, that Jedi could have seen that there was problems in the galaxy before the time of the Phantom Menace, and I don't disagree with that necessarily.
Yeah,
But I don't remember if it was in Master and Apprentice or if it was in Jedi Lost. But in one or the other, there is that discussion about, it has to be Jedi Lost, when Yoda tells Dooku, we are going to default to what the Republic chooses. Even if we think that this is the right thing to do, we are not the political leaders. We don't want to be the political. So
I think it's Master and Apprentice.
Is it? Yeah, you're right.
Because I think it's the discussion on slavery.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I remember now.
It's our other. Really, we reference Claudia almost as much as we do Captain. So I should make her a slide also.
But. And so I think the point is right, that there is more that could have. I mean, if the Republic had intervened to help Sereno, then that would have gone down differently. Because that's why Dooku. I mean, that's the ultimate reason he gives. Even though I think that was sort of by then too. That's the reason he gives for leaving, is that the Republic is only going to intervene because they found precious minerals you know.
Right.
But like, so if
Not
the
that that was political or anything.
right, yeah, but like that's the point though, is that the Jedi have chosen as part of
Right.
their dogma to defer to the Republic.
Yep.
And if the Republic says, help us with this problem, then they help. If the Republic says, we don't think that's a problem, then the Jedi have to say, we are not in charge and we don't want to
Right.
be in charge, because being in charge is a stronger thing that's going to lead to the dark side.
Right.
And I don't think that is necessarily automatically changed when the stakes become war rather than peacekeeping.
Yeah. No, and I liked that passage a lot. When I was reading Master and Apprentice, as much as I trust Claudia Gray with my life and the life of my hypothetical unborn children, it was a point in that book where I was getting a little concerned, because this is the type of topic where people so easily trash the Jedi, which is easy, because I'm not saying the Jedi are perfect or they did everything right or anything. For me, it's less that I'm trying to say the Jedi were right and more to say that it's really difficult to judge the Jedi, because I'm not sure anybody could have done better. But anyway, that's not the point I was trying to make. But I really liked that explanation that conveniently enough Yoda had. So of course I liked it in Master and Apprentice. Of it's a slippery slope. Of it starts out like, okay, yeah, the Jedi should go stop slavery. That makes sense, because Jedi should be opposed to slavery. But then where's the line, and at what point are you, as this super powered person with massive power over other beings, basically falling to the dark side by your own self-righteousness? And that's absolutely something that could happen, and to an extent, that's at least what Anakin claims he did. That's largely what happened to Dooku. Um, and I think it's a very important point to have, is just this: do the Jedi, by the sheer privilege of having Force powers, do they get to be judge, jury, and executioner for the galaxy?
I mean, and the choice that they have made, for better or worse, is to not make that choice. Like
Mm-hmm.
they have decided to let the Republic decide, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why they defer to the office of the Chancellor.
Yep.
Like, even in Phantom Menace, like, they are there because the Chancellor has sent them there
Yep.
to investigate, try to settle the trade dispute. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think it is about what their intentions were, but I also I just keep going back to what other alternatives were there. Like, there were
Mm-hmm.
only so many Jedi. They were only
Mm-hmm.
able to do so much,
Mm-hmm.
and they had chosen as part of their philosophy to not be in charge. Like
Mm-hmm.
and you see how easily Palpatine can sell the galaxy. The Jedi tried to take over.
Right.
You know,
He,
that's like a
he
real thing that people must have been concerned about.
he basically used the face app, made himself look terrible, and was like, the Jedi attacked me.
Yeah.
That
But
joke
like,
won't be funny next year, though, if
no,
anybody listens back.
but people believed it is the thing. And
Yeah.
like if that's the case, then it could have very easily been the case at more or less any point. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not it was part of the Sith plot or not, you know, the Republic was corrupt. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things I've always been interested in Count Dooku's politics, because he's not wrong about the Republic being corrupt. And we
Right.
see that in Master and Apprentice and in Jedi Lost.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and we've seen that in other things. Like, the Republic is flawed. Its democracy has at some point stopped to work. But
Yeah.
that's what is the role that the Jedi should have played in the moment is a different question than, with all of our understanding of the entire
Right.
context and
Right.
all of our understanding of how things played out in the end. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a different scenario. A different scenario.
And Fez Nest says again, Jedi did not have to intervene personally about slavery, but could have pressured the Republic to do more. I I don't disagree. I think that at some level the Jedi could have, and I don't think the Jedi should have necessarily let go of their own interests, but their own interests being interests of others. Like the Jedi could have been like, "Hey, we're helping you out, but like, why don't you do whatever?" I think it does go back to the slippery slope element. At some point, it's like, okay, well, they intervene on slavery, but do they intervene on trade disputes, and do they pressure on this? It's kind of like, how political do they make their organization? How non-political do they make their organization?
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's like, I agree with your sentiment, but it gets messy. And I think the big problem the Jedi had, and really the flaw they had, and what I don't remember, it was either it was probably our Master and Apprentice stream. I talked about how the Jedi kind of got into, one of their biggest flaws was when something was hard, they put it under the rug.
Right.
So, like, when it got difficult to deal with prophecy, which is why I think it was in the Master Apprentice stream, when it got difficult to deal with prophecy, because prophecy was messy and could lead you down the wrong path, they were like, well, we just shouldn't do it anymore. Like, no one does prophecies anymore. No one listened to them. This is no longer a Jedi thing. It's the same with emotions and interpersonal connections. Those are messy, so we just won't do them. And then with politics, politics is messy. We just won't do them. And it's a big irony that they keep preaching that fear is the path to the dark side, and yet the Jedi were so afraid of fear that that's what led them to complacency, at least in my opinion.
Well, and
Um,
I would add to that and maybe go a step further by saying it is them kind of ducking away from what gets messy, but
mhm.
especially when what gets messy is something that can and has historically led to the dark side.
Yes.
Like that's part of the reason why they avoid prophecy is because prophecy has led people to the dark. That's part
Yep.
of the reason why they avoid politics because politics have led people to the dark.
Mhm.
And and I guess the Revan question becomes more complicated then because Revan falls to the dark side because they don't involve themselves.
Mhm.
At least that's one argument.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. But I think another thing that we're not addressing here based on the Revan question is had the Jedi decided to go to war, how many or had decided not to go to war, how many Jedi say, "Oh yeah, that's cool. We'll just sit on the sidelines," and how
Yeah.
many of them say, "Screw this, that we're gonna go out there." Like you can't tell me that anybody would have convinced Anakin Skywalker
Right.
to to sit
To
on the
not. Yeah.
sidelines while a war is going on, and it's not
Mhm.
necessarily because of like a bloodlust, or
Right.
this like need to be aggressive, but
Mhm.
like Anakin is motivated by his morality, and I don't think his
Yeah.
morality, like he would have left the Jedi Order to go to war, which would
Mhm.
have maybe led to him falling to the dark side too. Like we've seen that pattern happen already.
Yeah. Well, and there's one thing I like to talk about with Anakin, where I think so much analysis about him somehow forgets that he was a slave himself.
Yeah.
And I always go back to another scene that comes up in discourse a lot is the romantic picnic on Naboo, where he's just like casually like, authoritative uh, governments and fascism and stuff, and Padme's like, okay, and I get why in just the context of that movie it seems so like Padme isn't this like really terrible, like what's wrong with you? But if you remember, he was a slave, and the Grand Republic of Freedom did nothing to help him.
Right.
He was saved by a Jedi breaking the Jedi Order, or breaking the Jedi Code, basically, to gamble and cheat at gambling, no less.
Right.
And then the Jedi and the Republic abandoned his mother to slavery for 10 years till he finally went back to get her, and she died in his arms. Like, Anakin is not going to have a strong opinion of democracy. He's
Right.
just not. And while I would disagree with him on that, I wouldn't blame him at all for the way he sees things.
I mean,
Uh,
and I don't know that it's fair of us, even knowing everything we know, to blame the
Mhm.
Jedi for the Republic's problems. Like
Right.
if the Republic is flawed, and I think it was, I don't know that it's I don't know that it's the responsibility of the Jedi to fix it such that we can blame them for it. And it's not to
Mhm.
say that they couldn't have done more. They shouldn't have done more, or that there weren't ways to make things better earlier or make things better
Mhm.
during the war. But it just comes back down to what was the responsibility of the Jedi.
Mhm.
And I don't think they were in a position to do anything different. Like, so do they go to Geonosis, but then not after Geonosis? Do they
Right.
not go to Geonosis? Like, does like what if we say that they were wrong to go to war? What part of what we know happens are we saying they should not have done? Like,
Right.
and I just don't know that it's an easy answer. Like, I think it's an easy thing to say that war was against the Jedi philosophy. I think
Mhm.
even Yoda would have agreed with that.
Yeah.
And that's what it's probably one of the Legends books, but there's a point where I think it's Yoda and Mace Windu are talking at some point about how, essentially you get a whole generation of Jedi that have only known war.
Yeah.
It might have been a Clone Wars episode too. I don't.
It was either that or it might have been Dark Rendezvous
Maybe so. Maybe so.
because I know you reread that recently.
Yeah. And so like they have this conversation about, we are a fundamentally different order now because
Mhm.
most of the Jedi that are here are too young to remember anything before this.
Right.
It's just like I was having a conversation with one of my students recently who it blows my mind now that I have college students that were born in the year 2000 and afterwards.
Yeah.
Like they have no memory of a time and not to make it too political either, but no
Right.
memory of a time that the United States was not involved in the war in Afghanistan. Like that
Right.
war has been going on for their entire lifetimes. And so you
Mhm.
get a generation of Jedi where this is the default for them. They don't
Yep.
remember, 800 years of peace. They don't
Right.
remember that it's been a millennium since the Republic was involved in a war. And so, like, it's easy
Mhm.
for us to say, yeah, the Jedi did something that they shouldn't have done. But
Mhm.
it's different to say, okay, you're Yoda in Attack of the Clones. What do you do differently? I
Right.
just don't know that there's a easy answer of what should have been done. I think that's ultimately where I come down in this.
To kind of leapfrog off of the point you just made, absolutely a lot of the younger Jedi wouldn't remember any other time. But I think it's also important to remember just before Geonosis, supposedly the galaxy has seen peace for over 1,000 years or whatever the specific number gets said. And it's easy for us because we've been, at least the US, if and a large portion of uh, off and on again with other countries, have been involved with the Middle East in this generation. Before that, we were there in the 90s. We had Vietnam, Korea in the days before that. We had World War II, we had World War One. There really isn't a generation in the Western world right now that doesn't remember some form of conflict. And because of that, we all have some sense of the cost of that conflict, regardless of whether or not I'm not here to say what we should or shouldn't have done in whenever or wherever, but war has a cost regardless of your opinion of it. It absolutely does. And we all have a relative or a friend who is bearing the burden of that if it's not someone who's bearing it themselves. And it's easy for us with that kind of cultural knowledge to look at a culture that had peace for 1,000 years that ran headlong into a galactic scale war, and they would have no idea the consequences. Maybe individual planets would, but a galactic scale, certainly anybody making a decision on Coruscant would have no idea what the cost of war is whatsoever. Um,
I
and that's
think
an important thing to remember.
to give more context to it too, one of my favorite lines in Attack. It's one of the most impactful lines
Hmm.
in Attack of the Clones. I already mentioned this at the end. Obi
Hmm.
Wan. Obi Wan basically says, "Well, that's over now," and
We won.
Yoda's like, "No, it's not. Like this thing is only getting started," and
Yeah.
I think it's so difficult for ahead of time to say, "Okay, this is the point where we stop." because at some point you've put your foot in it and now you're drowning.
Yeah.
Like if you follow the course of the Clone War through the Clone Wars TV show,
Yeah.
like the Republic gets pretty close to losing there
Yep.
for a while, and like things escalate so quickly that nobody apart from the Sith Lord who engineered the whole thing,
Mhm.
was in a position to realize just how quickly it was going to escalate. And so like you take the clones to Geonosis because it's the only way to save the people who are at Geonosis. But like, so do you send them back to Camino afterwards and say, well, that was useful, but
Mhm.
return to sender now though. Like
Right.
we've used them at this point, but
We're good. Thanks.
and I mean,
Yeah.
or do you take the approach of people like Bail Organa and
Mhm.
Padme Amidala who go to the Senate and say, we don't support this war thing, but we're not going to
Mhm.
quit the Senate because of it. We're going to stay here and we're going to try
Right.
to affect change as much as possible. Like, I don't see how that is different than what the Jedi chose to do. Like
Mhm.
the fact that the Jedi became, officers in the military is not that far distant from. You know?
Mhm. And I think another thing that's interesting when we talk about like what the role of the Jedi is it's really hard to think about because there's nothing like the Jedi that I can certainly there's no true allegory on Earth, and there are some things that are close in other story universes, but they're superheroes are well, they're super powered people. I don't really think of them as superheroes, but they're super powered people. They're a religious order. They are a political entity. They're all these sorts of things, and I think there are some people where they're like, that's the problem, and they should be just a religious entity. But yeah, but there's religious entities on Earth. You have the Catholic Church or what have you, but that's different. They can't like levitate things with their minds, right? Or like do a Jedi mind trick. So it's a different level of power versus what we see in fiction, which is largely like something like the X-Men. Um, and so it's hard to compare them. And I think for the people who look at the Jedi from a philosophical standpoint, and the philosophy of the Jedi is the most important part, then it's really easy to say, well, they shouldn't have gotten involved. But the people who view the Jedi as the superheroes of the Star Wars universe are like, well, no, they should have gotten involved. And I think there's something there's something in the middle to it. And like I said, I really don't want to sound like, no, the Jedi were super right to go to war. I don't think that. I just think that it's really like what you're saying. It's like they I my thing is, it's not really that I want you to think. I mean, everyone should think whatever they want. I saw Steve in the chat was worried about speaking up, which you should never be. We may be passionate, but we're cool with hearing everybody out. Um,
It's not like there's
but
a right or wrong answer to
it really isn't. We're talking
what
about
what
space lasers.
happened in this fictional universe.
Yeah, it's important that you get it right, darn it. But and now I totally lost my train of thought. Oh boy, where did I go? But I think it's just important to realize that the Jedi were a lot of different things. And this is what I want to say. What I was really don't want is for you to think they're right to go to war, or wrong to go to war, or right to use the clones, or wrong to use the clones, because any opinion on that is perfectly valid. What for me as a Jedi fan, as a Jedi lover, um, metaphorically, of course, because it wouldn't work any other way. Um, Usually, but is that just not to judge them, as weird as that sounds. I'll see so many people flippantly be like, the Jedi were just like, blah, blah, and I'm like, you don't know, you don't know, you're not looking at it like walking in their shoes. Um, it's for me, it's just I just wish everyone could realize it's complicated, and if we could all agree that it's complicated, I can kind of settle down off my soapbox.
Well, and maybe if I can say one more thing before
Hmm.
if you look at, because we have an example in canon now of
Hmm.
somebody that believes in Jedi philosophy, does not have Jedi super. I think you
Hmm.
can look to Baze and Chirrut in
Yeah.
Rogue One as exactly that. And like so, Chirrut believes in the Force and he
Mhm.
goes to Scarif. Like he
Yep.
beats the crap out of those stormtroopers. Like
Yep.
even though he believes that the Force is essentially non-violent because he believes that there's a moral reason to fight against oppression.
Yep.
And again, I think that just complicates this idea that there is a strict right or wrong. I think
Mhm.
the easy thing to say on Twitter is, "Look how evil the Jedi are,"
Mhm.
and it's more complicated.
Uh, and I think what blows my mind too is it's like, okay, maybe the Jedi aren't great, but they're not Palpatine, and like, not that that should justify anything they did, but it's like, okay, like they may have made wrong choices, and Fez Nest in the chat made the point that a lot of times the road to hell is paved with good intentions, which is very true. I mean, heck, look at Jurassic Park. Um, but just there is a difference though between that and somebody who's actively trying to take over the galaxy.
Well, and I think too, and not to put too fine a head.
Mhm.
Like it's if you're taking a test, I give tests for work. That's my job. I give tests. If I give
Mhm.
a multiple choice test where I know all of the answers are wrong,
Mhm.
then do I say that my student is wrong for picking one of the bad answers? And
Right.
I think that is the situation that the Jedi have gotten. That Palpatine engineered this so that there was no good choice.
Mhm.
And especially whether it's by the Phantom Menace, whether it's by Geonosis, at some point it was too late for the Jedi to choose. Like things
Mhm.
were already in motion, things were already going to play out, and that's not to say that the future was fixed, but
Mhm.
Palpatine had contingency plan on contingency and contingency
Mhm.
plan. And I think everything Star Wars is probably right. I think the Jedi lost themselves
Yeah.
in the war. I think that's something that all of the Jedi by the time of Revenge of the Sith would have admitted that hey, what we've forgotten ourselves along the way. But that's
I,
I,
I, I mean, I go back to every now and again I'll see somebody who goes, I just feel like it's possible Yoda struggled with like arrogance in the prequel trilogy, and I'm like, there's literally a 3 episode arc in the Clone Wars that is all about Yoda realizing he's arrogant,
no,
and he like fights the dark version of himself. Like, yes, Yoda struggled with arrogance, but it's not done in a way where it's like, look at that horrible person. It's done in the, ah, you know, it, I could do that. Like that could be me. I see the Jedi as a warning and not an obstacle, if that makes sense.
I don't. I feel like there's again everything Star Wars. I think you're right to say Mace should not have tried to kill Palpatine on his own. But
But Mace was also right that he had control of the Senate and the courts.
yep, I mean, and Palpatine tells Anakin exactly the same thing about Dooku. Everybody's
Hmm.
kind of fine that Anakin offs Dooku. Like
Yeah,
I don't.
and I think the important thing to remember there too with Palpatine is Palpatine was pretending to be defeated before Mace kills him. Like, if Palpatine was really bested, that would be one thing, but Palpatine was super faking. And that's part of why Anakin freaks out after he attacks Mace, is he's like, oh, you were super faking, which Mace could probably tell.
Well, and Emphas Nest says again, we just wish the Jedi had not fallen so Palp's plan. Like I think at the end of the day, I agree with that.
Yes.
But I think the problem is that there was no one moment where they fell for it. There were a lot of little moments where they fell
Hmm.
for it. It's unless
They added up.
unless you see what's going on at every single one of those moments, then it's
Hmm.
hard to.
Let's imagine watching the prequel trilogy knowing absolutely nothing about Star Wars. Like, no, not even just not have seeing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but I mean, like, literally, you've been in a bunker for 80 years and you came out, but you're the same age as you were before, and you watch Star Wars and you start with the prequels, like, what would you think?
Say you crash your plane into some ice. You
Yep.
wake up 70 years later, and people give you a
Yes.
list of things to watch.
And things you need to watch. Where do you start?
I mean, and I shouldn't bring up Endgame right before we end the stream, but just
You're
like
testing me.
I know, but like Tony at the beginning of Endgame is like, I'm not getting involved. Imagine if Endgame was 3 hours of Tony never changing his mind, and that's what happens if the Jedi don't go to war.
Yep.
So that's been our stream today. I don't know. There's no good place to leave this conversation. There's no
no.
good, like, you know, heartwarming moment because it's a
We all
tragedy.
come
Like,
through.
the
It
prequel
is.
trilogy
It
is
is.
a tragedy,
Yep.
and like if you read Hamlet or Othello, like
Mhm.
like there's no one moment where you can say, oh, if Othello had just chosen this, then his wife wouldn't have died, or if Hamlet had just chosen this, then he could have saved, his dad, or something like that. It's
Yeah. Well, and that's what I've said to people before too. Is people often look at the prequel trilogy as the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, but as much as it's the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, it is also the tragedy of the Jedi Order. And again, like, I agree with so many of the critiques of the prequel era Jedi, but that's what makes them fascinating to me, and that's what makes their story sad instead of what makes me angry at them, if that makes sense.
I mean, and if it's any consolation, I think all of them know it by the end. Yoda
Oh yeah.
says, I have failed. I have failed the galaxy, and so now I've got to go live on this planet by myself for a while
Yep.
because there's no other options now. Like, it's not like they don't understand eventually
Mhm.
that they were wrong. It's For me, it's just a question of when could they have been right.
Right.
And by the time we are invited into the story in episode 1, I think it's likely that moment.
I'm looking at JPD's comment. So you're saying you wonder if the Sith are a threat worth the Jedi's by any means reaction, or if the reaction is the arrogance of the Jedi facing the boogeyman antithesis. I would say it was worth the reaction because the Sith were that bad, right? Like, I don't know what I'm missing.
I mean, I think it's also fair that they didn't realize that everything that they were fighting against was the Sith.
Yeah,
At least not at first.
not
Like
a, not a, yeah. They didn't want to believe to the extent that the Sith were back for a long time.
even to the extent that they know that Dooku is Sith and Dooku is leading the Separatists, they don't also know that they are also being led by a Sith Lord.
I mean, Dooku straight up tells Obi-Wan everything, that Darth Sidious is in control of the Republic, and then they don't believe him because he's a Sith, even though he just told them the truth. Like, the Jedi don't want to believe that it's the Sith to the extent that they are. But yeah, so now we're going over past time. Thank you
Yeah.
guys for being here
Yeah, and
for this
thanks
conversation.
for hanging out. I mean, and I hope that we haven't seemed like super preachy about this. It's just that
Yeah,
we have strong feelings about it.
very
Um,
strong feelings.
but yeah, thanks for hanging out. And if there are other we don't want to be in the position of just responding to every argument that happens on Twitter. But
Yeah.
if there are questions like this that you would like us to talk about, be sure to leave them in our Discord or leave them in a comment on the YouTube video or hit us up
Yeah.
on Twitter because we like these types of things. Like having these kind of
Mhm.
deeper discussions. I mean, I could talk all day about, which costume is the coolest. We could have whole hours on that too, but we like the deep conversation. So,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and we're always worried that we won't be able to fill an hour. You guys won't be interested in it for an hour long discussion on something. So if it's something you guys are interested in, that helps us a lot with picking a topic.
if you're not already, follow us on all the things Twitter and Instagram. Join our Discord server. you're already here on YouTube, just hit that like and subscribe button. Or if you just hated this whole thing, hit the dislike button too.
These two know nothing about what they're talking about. I'm gonna dislike from every account I have.
Just hit a button. All we ask. Hit some whatever button you can find. Hit a button.
Engage with us. Clicks.
But that's gonna do it for us today, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye.